Okay, so in this video, we're going to continue covering all the meaning rules on GMAT sentence correction. So rule number 6, word choice. Different word choices or different word versions can change sentence meaning dramatically. So for example, rise, raise, and rise, or in this case, they're in the past tense, raised and rose. So the difference between raise and rise is that raise is, I say, an external verb, meaning that something has to raise something else. And for rise, it's an internal verb, meaning that something itself rises and it doesn't or act on another thing. So for this sentence, the Federal Reserve raised the interest rate is the correct version, because the Federal Reserve is acting on something else, which is the interest rate. But if the Federal Reserve rose the interest rate, then it doesn't make sense, because the verb rose or past tense of rise is not an external verb. It cannot be used to say something acts on something else. And on the other hand, Genghis Khan rose in power is the correct version, because again, rise or rose in the past tense is an internal verb. So Genghis Khan himself rise in power. He doesn't act that on something else, right? And Genghis Khan raised in power is incorrect for the same reason. And so you got to be careful with word meanings and word versions. So you got to polish your vocabulary, GMAT vocabulary, to kind of avoid this type of error, and follow the GMAT vocabulary to do in the to list to reinforce your vocabulary. Okay, 7th rule: action noun versus verb ing noun, or verb ing verb ing acting as nouns, or the I would say academic term for that is G-run. So for example, jogging, walking, swimming. I like walking, I like swimming, I like jogging, I like cycling. So those verb ing, those verb ing versions of walk, swim, and jog are being used as G-run. Growing, celebrating, graduating, same thing, right? And action noun for the same words could be growth, celebration, and graduation. So the difference is that action noun usually denotes sort of a process, a stage, a phase. Yeah. And verb ing gerunds like growing, celebrating, graduating usually means the action. So for example, when I say celebration, I'm talking about the event that is a celebration of somebody's birthday or anniversary or something like that. So the event, the location, the people, and then etc. etc. But when I say celebrating, then I'm talking about the action of celebrating, like cheering or singing or that kind of stuff. Okay, so you got to pay attention to that when you look at GMAT SC, especially when there are answer choices that one uses an action noun and the other uses a verb ing form of the same verb. So let's look at these two sentences, for example, and see how they are actually different. Growing saltwater prawns can be very risky for the aquaculture farmer. So in this case, growing is in the verb ing form, and it's talking about the action of growing saltwater prawns, like taking care of them, feeding them, treating them with diseases, etc., that kind of stuff. But in the second sentence, saltwater prawns raised with indoor farming can experience significant growth. So here, growth is not an action of just growing. It's actually talking about an entire phase or a stage of the prawns. Is getting heavier, it's getting bigger, it's getting nutrients and then excreting waste, etc., that kind of stuff. So it's very different from the action of growing, like farming saltwater prawns, as in the previous sentence. So you got to pay attention to that when you look at different versions of the same original verb action noun, and verb ing noun. Okay, eighth rule, adjective versus adverb. So grammatically speaking, adjectives always modify nouns and pronouns and nothing else. Adverbs, on the other hand, modify everything else. Adverbs modify adjectives, modify verbs, modify even other adverbs, and entire subject-verb clauses. So we have two sentences here. Oh, no, actually not two sentences, two phrases. Beautiful handwritten letter and beautifully handwritten letter. So you can see that in the first version, beautiful is in the adjective form. So that suggests that it's modifying the noun letter. But in the second version, beautifully is the adverb, and it is because it's an adverb, so it cannot modify the noun letter anymore. It's got to modify an adjective or something that acts as an adjective, and that is handwritten. So you can see that in the first version, it is the letter that is beautiful. It's the letter that is beautiful. But in the second version, it is the handwriting that is beautiful, or the handwriting on the letter was done beautifully, right? So it's very different in meaning. What the word beautiful or beautifully is actually modifying, changes the meaning of the sentence entirely. And for the well, so just to make it a little bit clearer in terms of like a difference between these two. So when you say a beautiful letter, you're not specifically talking about the handwriting. You could talk about the design of the letter, the shape of the letter, the colors of the letter that make it beautiful. But when you say beautifully handwritten letter, then you're talking specifically about the handwriting. You know, the words, the strokes of the pen, this kind of stuff, very beautifully written, very elegant, or something like that. So that's the difference. Rule number 9, main noun versus main verb problems. So this particular error usually deals with the main noun of a sentence subject and the main verb of a sentence verb, or in a particular clause. So the point is that they got to make sense together. So let's actually temporarily skip these examples right now and pick something that's kind of more uh, down to earth, I will say. So we have two sentences here. The development of hybrid cars can run at 80 miles per hour. And the second sentence is the hybrid cars being developed can run at 80 miles per hour. So in the first sentence, the main noun of the subject is development, but the main verb is run. In the second sentence, the main noun of the subject is cars, while the main verb is still run. So you can see that it doesn't make sense here because in the first sentence, it doesn't make sense here because development is not the thing that can run at 80 miles per hour. It's the cars themselves that can run at 80 miles per hour. So the first sentence is incorrectly worded. So that's a problem with meaning when we have the main noun and the main verbs in a sentence. So error number 9, I just realized it's actually the same thing. You can skip that right now. Okay, so rule number 10, noun versus that plus subject verb, or noun as the subject versus that plus clause, subject verb clause as the subject. So the difference is that when you talk about noun as the subject, then you talk specifically about that kind of entity of that noun. But when you use an entire subject verb clause as a subject, that plus subject verb clause as a subject, then you're not talking about specifically just that subject, just a noun. You're talking about an entire event, or an event, or a fact. It's actually an entire something with an action of something. It's not just just simply something, not simply a noun. So what does that mean? So let's take a look at these two examples. That the contract was invalidated is the legal department's problem. Second sentence is the contract being invalidated is the legal department's problem. So you can see that in these two sentences, there's a difference in the subject. The first sentence has the subject as an entire subject verb clause. That subject is the contract, and the verb of that clause is it was invalidated. But in the second sentence, we have a noun phrase as the subject, the contract being invalidated. And in this subject, the main noun is contract. Being invalidated is no longer a verb in, let's say, a clause as in the first sentence. It's actually a modifier now. And because it's a modifier, so it becomes a subordinate portion of the sentence, or is not the main content of the sentence or the phrase. So in this case, the difference meaning becomes the first sentence is talking about an entire event of an entire kind of an action that the contract is invalidated. This whole thing is the legal department's problem. But in the second sentence, the meaning becomes the contract itself is the legal department problem. And the contract itself just has an additional property of being invalidated, but it's not kind of the key thing of the contract. Just the contract itself is already the legal department's problem. So that's the difference in meaning. If the author wants to specifically say that this whole thing, this whole event of the contract being invalidated was invalidated, is the problem, not just the contract itself, just the fact that the contract got invalidated. That fact is the legal department's problem. Then the first sentence is better. It expresses that meaning more correctly instead of the second sentence. If the author just wants to say the contract itself is the problem, and the fact that it's invalidated just kind of like an additional top, just additional information, but it's not critical, not crucial to what is exactly is the problem, then the second sentence is better. Right? So you got to pay attention to that when you see this difference in the answer choices. What is the author's meaning? What is the author's trying to get across here? Okay, so that's it. That's the last kind of rule in terms of meaning. So again, pay attention to these rules in as you practice, and go back to this file once in a while to make sure that you are aware of the differences, the subtle differences in meaning in sentence correction.